Bartosz Bartosik is Polish journalist and publicist, author of texts about social, cultural, and religious topics. Active also in the think tank Wieś, which means bound. Graduated from Slavic studies at the University of Warsaw, and also he studied here in Prague. And maybe I can say some secret that he is Bohemist in his original profession. So, please, prosím.
Yeah, I want to start with a quotation. That is, start of quote. The shortest path toward dechristianization and secularization leads through the Christian National Alliance, said a certain Polish senator in 1991. These words, although the Christian National Alliance was the name of an actual political party at that time, it also, these words describe the ideology behind that party. So the ideology was basically trying to connect the state and the church in a form of alliance in which the church works as the guarantor or warrantor of the political order, right? And so the idea of this movement was looking up to, they were looking up to Pinochet in Chile, they were looking up to Salazar in Portugal, and this was like this kind of one of the developing political movements in the 1990s in Poland, which eventually actually lost in the political process. It kind of blurred out of the political scene. But the irony behind these words is that when the same senator, the same politician came into power in 2015 in Poland, because his name is Jarosław Kaczyński, well, he started realizing the exact same policy he so much criticized in 1990. So how did it happen? How it developed? I want to answer that question at my presentation. But before I get there, I wanted to, for a moment, stop on the question on authoritarianism in contemporary Polish politics, because it's important, I think, to clear out some details here. Since 2015, Poland has been called by experts, academics, as a flawed democracy, as a competitive authoritarianism, or authoritarianism with low intensity, just to quote a few. If you look at this indices of global democracy, Poland dropped dramatically, especially on the scales of judiciary freedom, especially on the scales of fundamental civil rights, and on the freedom of speech, right? So there's clearly some kind of dynamic here toward authoritarianism. But I want to also stress out that this is part of the story, only a part. Because on the other hand, you can talk about the exact opposite, right? The democratic successes, you can say, in which this case you can measure it with the voting turnout in the elections, which have been record-breaking in the last couple of years, in all the elections, presidential, parliamentary, and European elections. You can talk about various social programs that the current government introduced that garnered massive popular support, unlike anything else, I guess, from the land reform questions in 1950s in Poland and stuff like that. So this is important to notice as well, this side of the story. So the picture is pretty blurry, I would say, right? It's not very clear. And while there are clear authoritarian tendencies, and I want to focus on them at this presentation as well, there are some of the others, more like, say, democratic ones, you would say. And the most, let's say, authoritarian tendencies that are clearest to see and to notice in Poland today is, first of all, the fact that Poland practically functions in a dual legal system from 2017, in which some of the courts don't recognize other courts as legal courts. These other not recognized courts don't recognize European Court of Justice as their court. So this is like kind of very chaotic and simply horrible and practical functioning of the state. The current state took the current political powers took the state media and made it virtually propaganda, authoritarian propaganda antenna. And you can also clearly talk about the current government funding NGOs, funding media, funding businesses, and paying them money simply for supporting the government. And finally, perhaps for me, the most problematic thing of this all is the situation at the Polish-Belarusian border, because this is, of course, a longer story. I don't want to dwell on that too much, but what is most authoritarian about that story, in which the Polish state kind of builds a wall on the border with Belarus, not to allow Lukashenko to send in refugees from African and Asian countries to Poland. That's one thing, and this actually has acceptance as well of European powers. But the problem with that is, aside from it, the Polish government banned humanitarian aid and banned media for accessing the border zone. And what's more, it banned them from accessing it because they know that the Polish state services are performing some illegal or quasi-illegal actions toward the refugees crossing the border. But the most concerning thing is the moral side, is that helping people in that area is punished. So morally, it's the reversal of what a democratic legal system should be based on. So promoting, rewarding for doing the good and punishing for doing the bad is the exact opposite. Helping people to survive, because they are dying every day, today even, at the border, crossing into Poland. They are people who try to help them in any form, bringing clothes, bringing food. They are being arrested, not sentenced, because the courts, this is the dual legal system problem, right? They don't sentence them, but it's still being punished. So I want to just mark that these are blurry lines. So what does the religion, what's the religion role in all of that? And it's important to start from the ideological influence on the authoritarian tendencies. I will focus on the Catholic Church, obviously, because simply it's such a big dominant denomination in Poland, although I will mention ecumenical part as well to it. First of all, remember that Polish Catholic Church has seen two authoritarian regimes in the 20th century, from 1926 to 39, and then from 1944 to 1989, in between with the totalitarian Nazi occupation. And while there are very big differences between those two authoritarianisms in Poland, major ones, there are at least two important similarities. First similarity is that neither of those authoritarian regimes seek to make or to contextualize religion as their ideological backbone, or their ideological foundation, right? On the other hand, they never made church or tried to make made church illegal. They didn't try to erase the church entirely as well, unlike in, for example, Czech lands, which basically kind of happened, especially, or talk about Albania and stuff like that, right? So in Poland, it's a bit different, right? The church was tolerated, or even, in some cases, it was cooperated with. And what is very clear is that the church and its hierarchy especially maintained a sort of sovereign position within those authoritarian regimes, right? And this sovereign position actually allowed the church to be as well a form of like democratic space, where many dissidents, many people of various political orientations would somewhat accommodate, at least to a certain extent. And it's different in the 21st century. Because today, the Catholic Church is the backbone, ideological backbone, or institutional backbone for the government of Poland, of peace. First of all, in the road to power for peace, in 2015, the main kind of ideological concept behind it was the so-called Smolensk religion, as we call it. It's a very unfortunate name, but it's also telling. So what Peter Moray said about how myths are born, how the saints are seen in the national kind of context, that they're not, I mean, so how the secular creates as well saints in the quasi-religious context, is exact that story of how Smolensk religion came about. In short, I guess you most heard the story, so I don't want to kind of retell the entire story. Polish presidential plane crashes in the airport of Smolensk in Russia in 2010, coming to commemorate a tragedy of World War II, when in 1940 the Soviet regime murders Polish officers, intellectuals, lawyers, doctors, basically the elite of Poland in the woods around Katyn area in today's Russia. So they commemorate the plane crashes, 96 people die. It's a massive tragedy in a trauma for the entire state and the society. But what happens next? What happens next is both an example of instrumentalization of religion as well as messianization of politics. Because in practice, the central, the myth says, here, they went to Katyn to pay tribute to those who served not only the Polish interests in World War II, but who also served worldwide interest for, they were the victims of communist regime. They were somewhat unveiling, they were trying to unveil the truth about the criminal side of the communist regime in Russia. Now, in 2010, we go to commemorate them and we are murdered. The Poles are murdered by the regime of Vladimir Putin with, this is vaguely stated, but with some acceptance or even cooperation from the Polish government at that time, who was against peace, who was the opposition towards peace, right? And those victims of the plane crash, and this is an important linguistical note, they didn't die in Smolensk. They fell, like soldiers fell on the battlefield, right? This is something important, that they were playing service toward the Polish nation, but not only the Polish nation, but also what Peter described. They were paying service to the worldwide community, trying to kind of awaken us from this dream of Vladimir Putin's regime as being another kind of democratic, semi-authoritarian regime, which in fact actually is, yeah, it's how it works, how it doesn't work in practice. But the concept plays on the old Polish romantical concept of the Messiah of the nations, which pictures the Poles as a nation that has a special message, has a special mission to the nations of the world. We are the ones who, through our sacrifice, through our, even if it takes death for the cause, right, we will sacrifice ourselves so that everyone can be set free. In 19th century, it was setting free from the Russian imperialism and as well as German imperialism. In 2010, it was setting free from all this authoritarianism, they would say, at that time. And now, it had its own liturgy, the Smolensk religion. The liturgy was, again, quasi-Catholic, and that's why the Catholic Church plays an important role here, because it started with a Catholic Mass on every monthly anniversary of the tragedy. Monthly anniversary, it's kind of not how it's, because anniversary it's more about every year, but in every 10th of every month, we had this Mass in the Cathedral Church of Warsaw, after which, straight away, a political conduct began from the cathedral that walked through the streets of Warsaw. It was strictly political. But it used all the tropes also of this kind of quasi-religious formation, right? During these marches, the leader Jarosław Kaczyński would talk about seekers of the truth. Those who are attending the marches and the church mass are the seekers of the truth, are the ones who look for to unveil the evil in the world and to promote good, right? They play with many tropes, trying to suggest that there are traitors among us, and we have to deal with them, right? And we have to unveil the truth. And now, this belief, or maybe faith, in the Smolensk religion, was shared by about 20% of Polish society. And this 20% of Polish society is like the most stable, kind of supportive group towards peace today. So that's one kind of way how it works. Second way how the Catholic Church kind of supports this authoritarian tendencies is described also by sociologists. A team of sociologists by Mirosława Marody, a professor of Warsaw University, in 2010 describes by both quantitative and qualitative research how the Catholic Church is the most important institutional foundation for the peace powers. And they name especially two examples that you can focus on that have like a personal influence on Polish politics. One is Tadeusz Rydzyk, and the other one is Marek Jędraszewski, the Archbishop of Krakow. Tadeusz Rydzyk, it's a longer story that kind of exists in Poland since the beginning of transformation in 1989. But today it is important to notice, first of all, the financial story to this. Rydzyk's businesses, he's more of a businessman really than I don't want to say a priest, but he's officially a redemptorist. Polish journalist Bianka Mikołajewska said that in the first 5 years of the peace rule, he received grants which amount to about 75 million euros, and these are the official grants, donations, and money from the public institutions. That's the official ones, right? But because of this business of Rydzyk is so important to the Catholic Church, the bishops consider him as untouchable. Whatever he says and does, even if there are things like, for example, promoting priests who are officially accused of sexual abuse on minors and children, it's okay. He can do that because he's untouchable. You cannot do anything to him because he's so influential. And Rydzyk has a major influence on political power in Poland, a personal one. He once bragged about the fact that, well, the politicians didn't want to transfer us money for our another business initiative, but well, I have contacts, I will manage. That's what he kind of publicly said at the mass, right? So he has direct contacts, and what's more, the airing time in the Rydzyk's media that he runs is something that kind of helps and pictures the politicians who are at the center of power at that time. I mean, in other words, the more airing time on Rydzyk's media, the stronger your power in the government is. And it is especially the case for the PiS's kind of coalition partner. They function as one, but they're actually a coalition partner of Solidarna Polska, which is a very minor party with nearly no support, popular support, but they're very closely attached to Rydzyk and his media. And because Rydzyk promotes them in their media, they keep still a strong position within the government. Okay, it's a longer story. I will leave it because I don't want to dwell on that too much. Second personal story is Bishop Marek Jędraszewski, who is described by my boss in Więź, Zbyszek Nosowski, who also participates in the project, but couldn't come today. Nosowski once said about Jędraszewski, Archbishop Jędraszewski gave the church hierarchy in Poland an illusion of something that it most longs for, vision. The Catholic Church doesn't have a vision to how to work in a democratic society. And Jędraszewski brings it. While it's a very, very controversial vision, most bishops don't agree with him 100%, but they will kind of adhere to him, they will support him, because vision is so attractive. He's different than them. He has an idea, right? But the idea that he brings is, well, it's problematic to say the least. He speaks of rainbow-colored plague. That's how he describes the LGBT movement. He talks about, he basically doubted anti-pandemic measures in churches. He said that churches shouldn't have any anti-pandemic measures in them. He called atheist a caricature of men, and so on and so on. And it's important to notice them because nearly all of those tropes, all of those speeches he made were picked up by PiS and incorporated into their political agenda. So it's clear how actually Catholic bishops kind of is an ideological supporter and actually even influencer, you would say, toward the power. And that's the individual part. And the second part I want to focus here on is the more structural way of how Catholic Church creates authoritarian tendencies and supports them in Poland. One is that Catholic Church in Poland is a state within a state. It functions according to its own regulations that are intransparent, that are unclear to the public and very often to the state itself. One example is that is connected to the sexual abuse scandals, right? Polish bishop who set a world record, as we say in Poland, set a world record for a longitude of canonical process against a priest accused of sexual harassment and rapes. He is still a bishop, even though we know that this case was eventually closed with the death of an accused priest. For the next 2 years, they didn't want to reveal what the actual sentence was. Was he admitted guilty or not? Just recently, it turned out that the priest was guilty, but the bishop is still in position, and it's still actually one of the most influential bishops in the Polish episcopate, because he is perhaps using the same old techniques he used to delay the process of the priest, to delay the process of removing him from the office. And no one really understands why is it so. There's no clear rule about that. But that's the inner church, right, procedures. When it comes to the church-state relationship, the impunity is also very clear. Just last year, 2 instructions came out to the public which were supposed to be a secret. One from the nunciature of the Vatican in Poland, and one from the Polish general attorney. And the nunciature says, tells the Polish bishops and dioceses not to cooperate with the state commission that's working on the sexual abuse scandals. Basically, don't give them any powers. You don't have to, and we will, if there are any problems, report to us, we will take care of it, right? That's what the nunciature tells the bishops. And there's the other way around. The Attorney General actually tells his prosecutors, as he put it that, not to be antagonistic to the Catholic Church in seeking truth about sexual abuse, right? He simply discourages prosecutors from actually pressing on the issue. So there is a cooperation on that. This should be kept secret. It should be the matter of the church, and no one should know it. And that's how it works. Second way, a structural way I want to mention is the unipolar worldview of the Catholic hierarchy in Poland. It's important to note that historically in at least Poland, both clergy and lay people, both Catholic and of other denominations, were leaders, founders, and members of political parties of all the spectrum, from the left to the right. Maybe with exception of, I don't know, communists, right? But otherwise, socialists, nationalists, liberals, they all represented historically, also by the Polish Catholics, ideologically and so on. Today, it's impossible because of the relationship between peace, government, and the church in Poland. Simply today, thank you. Conservatism means Catholic, and this kind of killing kills the pluralism. And this killing of pluralism is also represented by the lack of dialogue within the Catholic Church in Poland. The Polish Catholic Church brings or carries on the old tradition from the previous authoritarian regimes. And this tradition was stated by the Cardinal Wyszyński, now a saint. Cardinal Wyszyński, or beatified. Cardinal Wyszyński, in the communist regime times, he makes a rule of no factionalism. So the same rule as Lenin implied in the Soviet Union in 1920. Right. So any dispute between the Polish bishops should be kept within the episcopate and never came to the light, to the public light. Right. So in practice, we have absolutely no dialogue, no disputes between at least the official structure of the church And if there is any, it's punished. So many priests, so not bishops, but priests were punished canonically by the bishops for speaking out against certain tropes, for speaking out against this authoritarian, for example, movements by the Polish government, and so on and so on. So in other words, the relationship, sorry, but I want to build some kind of similarity here between Tomasz Halik and Dominik Duka would be not possible in Poland. It's simply Tomasz Halik will be silenced in the Polish context. And the second effect of that, no factionalization, is that bishops like Marek Jędraszewski are never opposed by any other bishops. So even if there are, never, publicly at least. So privately, yes, but publicly they are never opposed. That's what also creates this the picture of the church, that Jędraszewski is the church, and what he says about LGBT being a plague is seen as the official teaching of the Polish bishops. So that's another story of that. And to finish up, because I believe I don't have much time yet anymore, I want to just have just as a kind of bullet points maybe, mention what I see as the possible cures are to the, so a very preliminary and bullet points only, right? So first of all, definitely pluralism is a cure to all of that. Like allowing also those still non-conservative, very nationalist movements in the church that still exist. They still exist, but they're like slowly not bleeding out, because it's not about bleed, but simply dying out because of lack of people of those orientations who stay in the church. They move away from the church. So allowing them and giving them space within the Catholic Church will be one thing. Second, dialogue and openness to dialogue, both internally in the church as well as ecumenical dialogue, which is important now in Poland because of the inflow of Ukrainian, Belarusian refugees that also bring about finally also different, not only ethnicities, but also denominational perspectives into the Polish society. There's also other religions coming to Poland from Asia especially, but that's another story. Third of all, one of the cures would be a better social teaching of the church. One good example in the Catholic Church in Poland is a document from 2017 when the Catholic Church strictly opposed nationalism as a dangerous ideology. This document is actually a very sensible one. The problem is that it is not at all promoted by the bishops. It was like created and then left alone. Like no one really speaks about it anywhere. It was an attempt to distance itself from the authoritarian and nationalistic tendencies in Poland. Fourth of all, transparency. So more transparency about both the financial and legal matters in the state-church relationship. And finally, the old rule of Polish Catholic Church was that it always aligned itself with the people and not the state. That's historically one of the reasons why perhaps Polish Catholicism has endured so much, and it is still quite popular in Poland, right? Is that it never counted to get, I don't know, much protection from the state, simply because the state was either negative, either saw the Catholic Church as a kind of rival, or because the church kind of had this society contact, had this grassroots movement kind of characteristic in a way in Poland. Today it's the opposite, right? Today the church, especially from when the peace came into power, is aligned with the power, and that actually strengthens secularization. So from my point of view, the main thesis here is that in Poland, what Jarosław Kaczyński predicted or called dechristianization and secularization is happening in somewhat intertwining way with authoritarian tendencies. So authoritarianism somewhat strengthens dechristianization and the other way around as well. So it works in a kind of circular way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please stay here.